Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи, в эфире программа Ushanka Show. American Diaries, 1995, by Sergei Sputnikoff, read by Arthur. June 18th, Moscow. 24 hours, a single day, a single sunrise and a single sunset. So much can change in such a short while. A single moment in time that can define your destiny, and I believe everyone has a day or two that is truly life-altering. I would not realize until many years later, but on June 18, 1995, my life would change forever. This was the day I left for the United States of America. 7,506 kilometers. This is the distance between Moscow and New York City. Just one non-stop flight, close to 11 hours, by friendly Aeroflot Russian Airlines. Oh yes, Aeroflot, the former Soviet Union's only air carrier. It wasn't famous back in the day for its Fly Aeroflot advertising slogan, like Soviet citizens had any other option for air travel. 7:30 a.m. I was barely awake on a cold hard bench in Russian Sheremetyevo International Airport. The orange glow of the morning light bathed in the empty rows of seats. I was disheveled and exhausted, cuddled up with my trusty and tattered Soviet-era backpack, my well-worn jacket, probably making me look like some bum. Moscow was a city of 9 million people, the bustling capital of Russia. Unfortunately, the only person I knew here, a former schoolmate, was out of town. The sole remaining option was to spend a lone restless night in a glass and concrete box of the half-empty 80s-era Soviet airport terminal. I had arrived in the capital on a slow-moving overnight train from Kiev the day before. The train had lumbered heavily through the endless countryside with its dirty windows and sweet perfume of a filthy bathroom mixed with hot stale air of a stagnant passenger car. With a handwritten address clenched in my palm, wary but optimistic, I journeyed for several more hours by bus and subway. Finally, I had arrived at what appeared to be an ordinary-looking 9-story apartment building on the far outskirts of the city. I rang the doorbell. A worn-out middle-aged lady in a bathrobe opened the door. I politely explained who I was as she slowly nodded and retreated inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. After a short moment, she came back and handed me a small square envelope and a folded bundle of a white cloth. It was a plane ticket to New York and a t-shirt. Final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Soon everything would change. America, here I come. Despite being the main international airport in Russia, Sheremetyevo was quite deserted in the middle of the night. In the side pocket of my jacket, right next to my big Ukrainian heart, was my USSR passport for traveling abroad, as well as 5 $10 bills, all I could scrape up for this trip across the ocean. The bench was not a very comfortable or fun spot for my sleepover. From time to time, I thought, why in the world did I get myself involved with CCUSA in the first place? CCUSA, Camp Counselors USA. It was a cold, rainy autumn day of 1994 when another Help Wanted Abroad flyer showed up on the old-fashioned cork bulletin board in the Kiev University Library. This time, someone was looking for students to work in the American summer camps. My very first thought was simple. It was obviously just another swindle. Many help-wanted scams began happening after the collapse of the Soviet Union during so-called jolly 90s. Newspaper classifieds and ads glued on the bus stop walls promoted terrific job opportunities. Workers were needed at Alaskan oil rigs and aboard fishing boats, German nursing homes, and construction sites, picking oranges in Spain or strawberries in England. Surprisingly, knowledge of the native language was not required, but the recruiters were asking for the down payment, usually around $100 to $300, a considerable amount of money for people of newly independent Ukraine, where the average salary was about $10 a month. One of my naive co-workers used such a recruiter and almost got a job in Germany. Almost, because several weeks after having paid a fee, he and several other unlucky job seekers would discover the company's office deserted and doors locked. The owners were gone, along with hopeful job seekers, money, and passports. So when my buddy Alex mentioned the unusual advert about summer camp jobs in the USA, we were both quite sure it was a scam. It just sounded too good to be true. An American company named CCUSA, fluent English requirement, as well as experience working with children, was probably just smoke and mirrors. Our desperate attempts to Google any information about this mysterious Camp Counselors USA failed, probably because Sergey Brin would not create this fantastic search engine for another 2 long years. If you're not sure who Sergey is, please Google it. We discussed this unusual job offer for a little while and finally decided to attend the meeting. I was curious to check out the CCUSA presentation and figure out how they were planning to fleece us. There were around 50 young people gathered in a rented hotel conference room in downtown Kiev. The CCUSA representatives came all the way from Moscow. They wore cheap wrinkled suits and didn't look impressive enough to be professional scammers. There was no excitement in their speech and no promises of earning tons of money across the ocean. Very strange indeed. The International Exchange Center, as these fine gentlemen called their company, offered a free trip to America through the CCUSA organization. The cost of participation in the exchange program was $350 United States dollars. Ouch! I was making about $20 a month at that time. CCUSA would provide free round trip to America, plus the summer camp would give $350 as a pocket money for the whole summer. But before all that, one had to pass an interview with American representatives from the CCUSA. The meeting will be in English, of course. Once I had well-detailed information about what CCUSA was all about, I realized that maybe it was not a deception after all. But this arose my doubt. In order to get an interview, you must give us $150 as a down payment. I thought aloud, dang it, so it was a scam. Now they want the down payment. My doubt subsided when a fellow in a leather jacket next to me mentioned that it was his 3rd time going to the States with these guys and that everything here was legit. I felt a little bit better. After another lengthy discussion with Alex, we decided to go ahead and give it a shot. So, we paid the money. The next stage was to prepare ourselves for the interview with the Americans. June 18th, Sheremetyevo Airport, Moscow. It was around 5 a.m. when a peacefully sleeping student from Kiev was rudely awakened by 2 classy, conceited ladies. These chicks landed on my bench and began loudly discussing the details of their extravagant vacation in Egypt. I had to listen to the heated exchange about someone who got wasted on the plane and about someone else who was showing off his thick wad of cash while buying duty-free goodies. At the same time, one of the ladies was rocking her long leg and with such excitement that her elegant shoe started tapping my calf, gently but persistently. Unfortunately, it was not happening in a seductive way. This was how one of the most important days of my life had begun. I went to the restroom to brush my teeth and change some clothing, putting on the crisp new t-shirt I received just yesterday. It had the International Exchange Center logo printed on the front. A day just began, and I already felt quite tired. Not a good start, but still an exciting one. Boarding for my flight to New York was announced soon. First I was done in perfect Russian with a funny Muscovite accent stretching A's into tomorrow, and then repeated in a horribly broken English. I got in a long line and to my delight found myself among a dozen or so excited young people wearing the same white t-shirts. We were all going to work in American summer camps. I discovered that 2 girls, a serious-looking Yelena with beautiful brown eyes from Pskov and upbeat redhead Julia from Ural Mountains, were heading to the same camp as me. Great news! I won't be the only Russian there. Our plane was a very cool American masterpiece, a Boeing 767. The cute Aeroflot flight attendants were so friendly and helpful, such a contrast from the mean and grumpy train conductor on the way from my hometown of Kiev. I couldn't wipe the stupid smile off my face. The flight from Moscow to New York took about 11 hours, but it didn't feel like it. Unfortunately, my seat wasn't by the window. I was so disappointed. However, we were fed a couple of times. That's right, I almost forgot about this nice perk of air travel, free meals and drinks. Several years ago, I embarrassed myself during the flight to Frankfurt, Germany. It was my very first time on a plane, and I brought along some chow. Soon after takeoff, I unpacked my dinner. Minutes later, the crew began dispensing complimentary drinks and trays with food. I felt quite stupid when an adorable flight attendant looked at my spread and asked if I would like even more food. Steaming white rice, green salmon, and tasteless green peas were served in tiny plastic containers. Not too bad. French white and red wine in miniature bottles were offered, as well as German beer in cans. Pretty cool. But I decided to stay sober and just had some coffee. We flew west, chasing the sun and making the day longer by 7 whole hours. On the screen, I watched the slow progress as we crossed the Russian border. It flew over Western Europe. I thought about my late grandfather Sergei. Exactly 50 years ago, in the spring of 1945, he was a POW in Nazi Germany. American soldiers liberated him and many other Soviet captives held in the Leipzig area. The Americans even offered the opportunity to go to the US instead of returning to Stalin's Russia. My grandpa didn't want to leave his wife and young son Misha behind, so the Yankees handed him back to the Soviets. That transfer changed him from prisoner of war into traitor of the motherland, and he found himself in a labor camp once again, this time in eastern Ukraine, rebuilding destroyed coal mines. Grandfather missed his chance to see America, but now, half a century later, his grandson was on his way across the pond. After our first meal, it was movie time. We watched a relatively new and intense movie Speed with Keanu Reeves and the adorable Sandra Bullock. At the end of the flight, the Aeroflot ladies even gave us some presents, including, for some reason, dark blue socks with company logo on them. Finally, we started making preparations for the landing. The touchdown was close to perfect, and then the flight attendant's sweet voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York City." I was so thrilled. I sighed, "Hello, America." As our plane was slowly rolling towards the terminal, I was amazed at the size and expanse of JFK Airport. It was awe-inspiring. Among hundreds of busily taxiing airplanes, I suddenly noticed a couple of beautiful silver birds, supersonic Concords. I had to admit that our Borispol airport in Kiev looked more like a sleepy small-town train station compared to this giant glass and concrete beehive. Heck, even Russian Sheremetyevo airport looked pretty pathetic against JFK. Shortly after, I was in a long line holding my dark blue Soviet passport and a US custom form. Ahead was passport control for foreigners. My palms got sweaty. I hated customs. Unpleasant nervousness, somewhat forgotten since the times I was smuggling contraband vodka to Poland, took over my body. Contraband. Newly independent Ukraine wasn't a fun place to live in the early 90s. Many state-owned companies and factories were closing or barely had their doors open. Meager salaries equal to $5 to $10 American dollars per month sometimes were paid with 6 months delay due to cash shortages in the banks. Some people were paid with the products the factory was producing: socks, cameras, sugar. One time, our desperate neighbor was begging everyone to help selling 50 brand new hair dryers she received at work instead of a late salary. Those days, I was making $730K a month or close to $9 million per year. It sounded extraordinary until you divide this huge sum by 36,500 to convert my salary in Ukrainian coupons to American dollars. So I was a multi-millionaire earning $20 per month. You can imagine what a huge chunk of change the $350 payment for the CCUSA services was for most Ukrainians, including me. It took a lot of effort. Some of my endeavors were perfectly legal, while others, somewhat shady, to earn this money. Once I took a train with a backpack full of garlic to sell in St. Petersburg, Russia. Later, the same rucksack went to Gomel, Belarus, loaded with salami. I brought big bags full of popular Dirol chewing gum from Moscow to resell in Kiev. My apartment had a pleasant minty smell for weeks after that project. I spent most of the weekends at the open-air markets around the city. I peddled crappy down jackets from China, pepper spray from Poland. That stuff was not exactly legal then. Cans of Nescafe instant coffee, and German audio cassettes. It became much easier to travel abroad after the collapse of the once mighty Soviet Union and the infamous Iron Curtain. Many of my entrepreneurial countrymen made quite a large chunk of change by hauling different goods across the borders. These so-called Chelnaki shuttle dealers were bringing leather jackets from Turkey, fur coats from Greece, and used Mercedes and BMWs from Germany. Others were smuggling photo cameras, cigarettes, and vodka to the former Soviet ally countries, Poland, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. Bootlegging was how I made my first $20. A friend of a friend needed a couple of mules for the trip to Poland to haul bags full of liquor. Lenky Alexei offered to help with getting the passport for traveling abroad. a tourist visa to Poland, and a train ticket. He provided all that free of charge plus $20 for the 3-day trip to the small Polish town of Kolo, where he was selling booze at the local bazaar. I didn't realize that Polacks loved cheap Ukrainian vodka. Nope, it wasn't the vodka, Alexei said. He specialized in Royal, 192 proof pure alcohol that someone else smuggled by truckloads into Ukraine from Holland. The idea of making a monthly salary in less than a week sounded great, plus I had never been abroad, so it was an instant duh. Yes. A couple of weeks later, I was on a train to Warsaw with Alexei and 2 other tourist mules. We each had 3 huge heavy bags packed full with bottles of Royal, duly clanking along with the train wheels. Ukraine was an independent country for over 3 years then, but there was still no border control between the former Soviet republics. Even my brand new passport was a Soviet-era document with the large golden letters SSSR, USSR on its dark blue cover. I was both nervous and excited to leave my home country for the very first time. However, when we arrived at the border town of Brest in Belarus at 2 a.m., I was downright scared. Not sure why, since there was nothing to lose. All contraband belonged to Alexei, and he didn't look that worried. Burly Dmitry, another mule sitting across, actually seemed quite happy, carefully sliding the wedding ring back on his fat finger. Not long ago, he begged us to vacate the compartment so he could have a quickie with a promiscuous female tourist next door. The bastard made us wait like an hour in the corridor. Alexei was pissed. But I guess there was something romantic about meeting a stranger on a train that carried some people away. Intimidating, red-eyed customs and passport control officers stepped on the train to inspect our luggage and documents. I was staring out of the window and trying not to panic. There in the darkness, the railroad crew was performing so-called bogie exchange out of our train cars. Railroad tracks were narrow in Europe. Before I knew it, the pogranichnik, border patrol officer, opened the door and checked our passports and visas, comparing our mugshots with our sleepy faces. Then he put an ink stamp with that particular day's date on the passport's back page. The scary part was customs. The whole train was probably full of shuttle tourists just like us, smuggling this or that into neighboring Poland. Alexei promised we should be fine, although he didn't sound persuasive. I saw him murmuring with other tourist group leaders during the hours before our arrival to Brest. It looked like some money was collected, but I wasn't sure. After a grumpy border patrol officer left for the next train car, Alexei hurriedly left our compartment to meet a couple of blue uniformed custom officers by the entrance door. A short, quiet conversation followed. I was carefully peeking. A small wad of cash quickly changed hands. Heads nodded, and then the straight-faced customs guys just casually strolled through our car without even bothering to check anyone. Our train rumbled loudly across the bridge over the fog-covered Bug River, and suddenly I was in Poland. But it was too early for a celebration. Not long after, the train stopped in the Polish town of Terespol. Sure enough, we were checked and searched all over again, this time by very stern Polish officers. The border control performed the same procedures as their colleagues across the river, and my passport got graciously adorned with yet another fresh ink stamp. The Poles from the customs were explicitly searching for any optics, I guess Soviet film cameras and lenses, asking the same question in every train car compartment. When the guy opened our door and barked, "Optica!" I decided to play dumb and handed him my glasses. The officer angrily mumbled something on his breath and left, slamming the door very hard. We made it through. Everyone was exhausted but still very excited. Everyone but Big Dmitry, who suddenly became very concerned by the fact that he hadn't had a condom while taking that girl to the Polish pound town. "That bitch better be clean," he kept mumbling. "My wife will kill me if I bring home anything other than money." "You can stick your dick in a bottle of Royal," suggested grinning Alexei. "It's a good disinfectant, and the Polacks might like that flavor too." "You're not funny," hissed Dmitry. Our compartment shook with laughter. It was early Sunday morning when we arrived in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. The Warsaw Central Station was surprisingly empty. Bitching and moaning, our team dragged the bags across several platforms, and before long, we were on a local train heading towards our final destination, the town of Kolo. Unfortunately, I was too exhausted to appreciate the fact that I was actually in a foreign country. Kola was a tiny town and the scheduled train stop was for 45 seconds only. Unloading 12 super heavy bags in such a short time sounded like a nearly impossible task. I got nervous again, although Alexei had a plan. When the train stopped, we were ready and started tossing the bags out of the train car window and the door simultaneously to a partner mule on the station platform. Amazed Polish passengers were quietly watching this Soviet circus performance. We delayed the train by only 10 seconds. To our amazement and pride, not a single bottle was broken. Hell yeah. Unfortunately, only this first trip to Poland was successful. The following 2 consecutive runs, we were ordered by customs to leave the train with all our goodies at the border and had to return home empty-handed. Well, we were actually loaded with bags of unsold liquor. That was the end of my Polish bootlegging, but I still earned sweet $60 for 3 royal runs and travel abroad as well. June 18th, New York. Well, surprisingly, American customs didn't care about searching my beat-up backpack, and we all sailed through immigration control without any problems. Fortunately, my Soviet passport didn't bother anyone whatsoever. I was nervous about it because the USSR disappeared from the world map about 3 years prior. The middle-aged immigration officer was amiable. He mentioned that I was allowed to visit Canada while applying the ink stamp on my US visitor visa. But he also gave a friendly warning. I should bring the passport along, otherwise I would be in a deep shit. He actually said it. Smiling CCUSA representatives greeted the Russian team right outside the airport building and ushered us in a large luxurious bus. I couldn't wait to see the famous New York City. The bus began lumbering through the dense traffic. I was in awe. I had never seen anything like this except in American movies. It felt like I was a part of a show, a part of unreal reality. My brain refused to believe my own eyes. Wide multi-lane highways were packed with thousands of unfamiliar-looking cars and trucks. The sizes of the cars were impressive. They were as big as our Soviet-made Chaika limousine, the Communist Party leader's preferred vehicle. I couldn't take my eyes off the humongous American semi-trucks that belched huge clouds of thick black smoke out of their giant chrome exhaust pipes. Since having seen the movie Convoy with Chris Christopherson several years ago, I had been crazy about American highway monsters. Finally, our bus made its way through the heavy traffic to the famous Brooklyn Bridge, which, as I had heard, was for sale from time to time. Massive Gothic-style towers connected by hundreds of thick steel cables looked spectacular. Behind the river was a shiny glass wall of the Manhattan skyscrapers. My heart skipped a beat. The view was simply breathtaking. For as awestruck as I was, the party pooper next to me was equally unimpressed and kept muttering how it still feels like Russia. Before long, we were driving through the famous neighborhood, Harlem. The view behind the tinted bus windows was just horrifying. Everything on these streets looked alien. There was some kind of havoc everywhere. People with unimaginable hairstyles were lazily strolling by the buildings, with walls covered in crazy and bright graffiti. Little shops had thick iron bars on the windows. Shady-looking characters were hanging out on the street corners or were leaning against the walls. I watched this strange world, the black ghetto of New York, and my chest tightened with a sense of panic. Welcome to the inner city, comrade. You see, my final destination was the summer camp for the inner city children. My mouth suddenly went dry. Inner city. I had never heard these words together before. Inner city. So I couldn't understand what was going on when an envelope arrived from the CCUSA. Great news! They found me a position in the summer camp for inner city kids from Chicago. Although, strangely enough, the place was located in DOWAGIAC. How in the hell do you pronounce that? MI. It was somehow related to this mysterious inner city Chicago. I also wasn't sure what MI stood for. MI as in Minnesota? MI as in Mississippi? Am I as Missouri or am I as in Michigan? Wasn't Chicago located in Illinois? I dialed the International Exchange Center office right away to find out what was going on. I nearly dropped the handset when they explained that I would be a counselor for youngsters from the Chicago ghetto, the inner city. The worst great news ever. June 18th, New York. I was staring in astonishment at the streets of Harlem when the bus suddenly made several sharp turns, and before we knew it, we arrived at Columbia University. Despite being located right next to that scary ghetto, the campus looked just fine over here. Pretty, clean, and neat. The oldest college of the New York State seemed just splendid. The massive library building with the classic Greek-style statue of Alma Mater reminded me of a museum. There was a campus security car parked inconspicuously next to the small fountain, like a friendly reminder that Harlem was just around the corner. Since it was summer, the place was mostly deserted. We were quickly assigned to rooms in the empty college dorm. They turned out to be very basic. Next, we had to exchange our return tickets to Moscow for white CCUSA t-shirts and information packages with everything for the trip to our assigned camp. The company representatives promised to send our tickets back a week before the end of the summer. I was warned about it way back in Kiev, but it still didn't feel right. But, as my ex-girlfriend used to say, even good times in your life can leave a bad taste in your mouth. I got the idea though. My ticket was like a hostage, so I wouldn't run away from my camp too early and go home. Trust, but verify. Or, as we say in Russia, even being a friend with the bear, you should still hold an axe behind your back. There was some talk back home about getting $50 as a bonus from the CCUSA upon arrival to New York, but there was no such luck this year. The only items offered here were $20 international phone cards. The price was quite inflated, as I discovered later. After taking a quick shower, our Russian team went to explore the most magnificent city in the world, after Moscow, New York. Pretty badass, huh? We spent several hours strolling along Broadway Avenue, one of the city's oldest streets. The city looked so strange and unusual. I felt like I was on a different planet. One minute I was staring in puzzlement and amazement at this silly pedestrian sign flashing words walk and stop. Apparently Americans didn't know the meaning of red and green signals. Next, I was snapping photos of cool cars cruising along Broadway, cars I had only seen in Hollywood movies. People walking by looked different too. I had never seen so many blacks, Asians, and Indians in my life as I met in 1 hour in New York City. In fact, I saw just a dozen or so non-white people back home in Kiev. All of them were the local university students from Africa, India, and Vietnam. New York looked different, sounded different, and even smelled different. Strange, unfamiliar food aromas were teasing my nose from the open windows and doors of countless small restaurants, and everyone spoke English. First, it sounded like music to my ears, but soon my brain got overheated from the constant attempts to translate it into Russian. I was beginning to feel overwhelmed. Suddenly, the metal grating under our feet shook violently, and we all freaked out. Hot air blew from below, and, to my complete astonishment, I saw the roofs of subway cars rumbling right under my feet. Inconceivable! I couldn't believe my eyes. New York metro tunnels were so ridiculously shallow. It was a blasphemy for a guy from Kiev, the city with the deepest subway station in the world, Arsenalna, buried 346 feet below the surface. It is worthwhile to mention the strange outfit I had on that sunny afternoon. Besides a white International Exchange Center t-shirt from Moscow, I was sporting hideous dark green shorts with bright violet flowers. You see, we were strongly advised by camp counselors people to get some shorts before coming to America. Unfortunately, no one considered shorts as a proper clothing for adults in the former USSR, so I had a hard time trying to find anything at the local flea market. We sincerely hoped to make it on foot to the famous Times Square, but it was too far away. Plus, all those countless little shops packed with goodies were extremely distracting. We had to check them out. The prices seemed shockingly low. The biggest surprise was to discover stores 90 cents or less, where most merchandise was cheaper than $1. That was simply mind-blowing. Many of us, especially the girls, couldn't handle this low-priced paradise very well, and the shopping had begun. The Russian cosmonauts continued to explore the planet New York, and in search of food we discovered the joys of local pizza. My goodness, that alien grub was delicious. Hand-tossed thin-crust pizza was generously sliced and sold by the piece right out of the hot oven. Prices were quite reasonable too. It felt very odd paying for my food with American dollars and receiving strange coins as change. Coins! I had nearly forgotten about such a nuisance. We hadn't used coins in my native Ukraine for several years at this point. Wild inflation of over 1000% per year made the coins obsolete. Well, we never made it to Times Square or Central Park. Everyone felt exhausted. The only downer during this fantastic walk through the Big Apple was the hot, muggy city air. It was around 10 p.m. local time, 5 o'clock in the morning in Moscow, when I finally collapsed in my bed. I was indeed sleeping in America.